My greedy stepmother thinks she will take control of everything once my father's health deteriorates and believes the house will be hers after he's gone. But she doesn't know that the house actually belongs to me, and I've kept this truth hidden for the past 2 years. As he is about to enter palliative care, the time has come to reveal the truth and the surprise that will change everything. My dad's going into hospice next week, and it's been a mess for a while now. I mean, we all knew it was coming, but it doesn't make it any easier, right? The thing is, the house he's living in with his wife Sandy and her 2 daughters, Tina and Beth, isn't even his house. It's mine. I bought it years ago. But you wouldn't know that by the way they've been acting. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me rewind a bit. About 7 years ago. Things got rough for my dad after my mom passed away. They'd been together for over 30 years, and when she died, it wrecked him. I mean, it was hard for all of us, but my dad, he fell apart. He lost his job a few months later, couldn't keep up with the rent on their apartment and got evicted. It was like everything just crumbled at once. And he didn't have anyone else to turn to. I was all he had. So being the only kid in a position to help, I bought him a house. Nothing crazy. Just a small place in a quiet, older neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. And more importantly, it gave him a roof over his head when he really needed it. He had his dog Charlie, too. And honestly, Charlie was like his last connection to my mom. That dog was family to us. You know, it made the whole situation a little easier for him. For the first few years, things were good. Dad was healing slowly, and the house became his little sanctuary. He got back on his feet as much as anyone could after something like that. And Charlie was always there by his side, keeping him company. I visit every weekend and it became our routine. Charlie would wag his tail like crazy whenever I showed up. And we'd hang out in the backyard, grilling burgers, catching up, just trying to enjoy life again after everything that had happened. Then Sandy came into the picture. They met through some mutual friends, and before I knew it, they were married. I wasn't against it or anything. I mean, I was happy for my dad if this was what he needed. Sandy seemed alright at first. You know, she was polite, always had a smile. And she seemed like she genuinely cared about my dad. So when he said she was moving in, I didn't have a problem with it. It's his life, after all, even if it's technically my house. As long as he was happy, that's all that mattered. But here's where things started getting a little weird. First, it was just Sandy moving in fine. Then out of nowhere, her daughter Tina shows up with all her stuff, like she's moving in too. Now Tina's in her late 20s, a grown adult. It's not like she's some kid who needs a place to crash for a weekend. No, she's there to stay. I didn't say anything because, again, it's my dad's life, and I wanted to respect that. But still, it was a little strange, right? A few months go by, and I start noticing things. Every time I visit, there's more of Sandy's stuff everywhere. The house, which used to feel like my dad's place, now felt like it was more hers. Whatever. I told myself, Dad's happy. Let it be. But then, just when I thought it couldn't get more crowded, Beth, the younger daughter, moves in. Now it's a full house. Sandy, Tina, Beth, and my dad all under one roof. And you can imagine how that went. At first, I tried to let it go. I mean, yeah, it was weird seeing my dad's home being slowly taken over by Sandy and her daughters. But what could I do? I'm not going to tell my dad how to live his life. But things started getting worse. The vibe in the house shifted. Suddenly, my dad's opinion didn't seem to matter much anymore. Everything was about what Sandy and her daughters wanted. Things were already going downhill with Sandy and her daughter slowly taking over my dad's house. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get more annoying, we had the whole mess with Charlie. Let me explain something about Charlie. This dog wasn't just a pet. Charlie was family. My mom loved that dog like he was her baby. And after she passed away, Charlie became my dad's emotional support. It was like Charlie was the one thing keeping him grounded after everything that happened. I know some people don't get that, but if you've ever had a dog, you know what I mean. So you can imagine how much it pissed me off when Beth, Sandy's youngest daughter, started complaining about Charlie. Like, really? Charlie was old, harmless, and spent 90% of his day either sleeping or chasing his own tail when he wasn't too tired. But one day, out of the blue, Beth comes up with this whole thing about how Charlie makes her uncomfortable. She said she didn't feel safe with him around. Now, I'm not one to dismiss people's fears, but come on, this was Charlie, not some rabid wolf. The guy was 12 years old, could barely make it up the stairs without needing a break, and was about as dangerous as a pillow. I didn't take it seriously at first. Thought maybe she was just being dramatic. But Sandy, of course, jumped in to back her up, making a whole big deal out of it. She started saying that maybe it was time for Charlie to find a new home, like he was some unwanted furniture that needed to be thrown out. That was my breaking point. I could see the stress it was putting on my dad. He wasn't just being asked to give up a dog. He was being asked to give up the last real connection he had to my mom. It broke my heart to see it, but what could I do? I wasn't living there, and Sandy had pretty much taken over the decision-making in the house. I could tell my dad didn't want to get rid of Charlie, but he was tired. He was dealing with his own health issues, and I guess he didn't have the energy to fight back anymore. So, yeah, I stepped in. I told my dad straight up that Charlie could come live with me. I wasn't going to let Sandy or her daughters bully him into giving up that dog. My dad was relieved, but I could tell it still hurt him. I mean, he didn't want to give up Charlie, but he knew it was the only way to stop the constant arguing in the house. Sandy acted like she was doing him some huge favor by letting me take Charlie in, but I knew better. It wasn't about Charlie. It was about control. She and her daughters wanted to be the ones calling all the shots. And Charlie was just another way to push my dad out of the decision-making process in his own home. From that day on, I started bringing Charlie with me every time I visited. And every single time, it was like I was bringing some kind of dangerous animal into the house. Tina and Beth would literally act like Charlie was going to maul them any second. The first time I showed up with him after taking him home, Beth actually screamed when she saw him, like she hadn't lived with this dog for the past few years. Sandy tried to play it off, but you could see her rolling her eyes every time I walked in the door with Charlie trotting behind me. It was ridiculous. Charlie would come in wagging his little tail, barely noticing them, and all they could do was complain about how scary he was. I'd sit with my dad in the backyard, just like we always did, while Charlie lay there in the grass, not bothering anyone. Yet every time Beth or Tina would peek out the window, they'd give us this disgusted look and run off like they were avoiding some kind of attack dog. Honestly, I think they just hated that Charlie was still around, because it was a reminder that this was my dad's house, not theirs. Charlie was part of my dad's life, part of my mom's life, and no matter how much they tried to take over, Charlie was a constant reminder that they hadn't completely pushed my dad out yet. But then one day, Sandy finally said what I knew had been coming. She asked me not to bring Charlie around anymore. I was fuming. Why? I asked. Charlie's not doing anything. He just sits there. She tried to sugarcoat it, saying how Beth still felt uncomfortable and how it was just better if Charlie didn't come over anymore. I could see right through it. This wasn't about Charlie at all. This was about power. She and her daughters had been slowly chipping away at everything that was important to my dad. And now they wanted to get rid of the last thing that connected him to his old life. I was livid, but I didn't want to make things harder for my dad. He was already sick, and the last thing I wanted was to stress him out more. So I told Sandy straight to her face, Charlie stays. He's not hurting anyone. And if you don't like it, then don't come outside when I visit. She didn't like that, not one bit. But I wasn't backing down. I could tell she wanted to push harder, but I wasn't giving her the chance. From then on, every time I visited, Charlie came with me. And I didn't care what they thought. My dad deserved that much at least.